What happens when an athlete isn't just fighting for victory, but for the right to compete at all? What happens when sports try to silence them, but they refuse to back down? From the Olympic pool to the NCAA courts, from football fields to MMA cages, these 5 LGBTQ+ athletes didn't just play the game, they changed it. They challenged the rules, broke barriers, and proved that no one gets to decide who belongs in sports except the athletes themselves. Welcome to Rainbow Spotlight, where we bring you the stories of LGBTQ+ icons who are rewriting history. If you're ready to hear about the athletes who took on the system and won, then stay tuned. Number 1. Ian Thorpe, the Olympic legend who refused to be defined by others. For years, Ian Thorpe was a swimming icon, a national hero in Australia, and a 5-time Olympic gold medalist. But long before he ever publicly came out, the world had already decided what his sexuality should be. From the moment Thorpe started dominating the sport, the rumors followed him everywhere. He was young, charismatic, and too well-groomed, too soft-spoken, too different from the macho image people expected from a male athlete. The media hounded him, fans speculated, journalists prodded. Are you gay? Why won't you say it? Why are you hiding? The pressure was relentless, and for years Thorpe denied it. Not because he wanted to lie, but because he had no choice. The world of sports wasn't ready for an openly gay Olympic champion. The sponsors weren't ready, the media wasn't ready, and deep down, neither was he. Thorpe spent his entire career fighting battles in and out of the water. He was a record-breaking swimmer, but also a young man struggling with his identity in an industry that demanded perfection and control. He dealt with crippling depression, feeling like he could never truly be himself. He once admitted that he told himself he was straight so many times, he almost believed it. Then, in 2014, a full 8 years after he retired from professional swimming, Thorpe finally told the world the truth. "I'm not straight." And this is only something that very recently, within the past 2 weeks, I've been comfortable telling the closest people around me. It was a powerful, raw moment. But the saddest part? He didn't just fear coming out to the world, he feared coming out to himself. And here's the reality. The world failed Ian Thorpe. Instead of creating an environment where he could have thrived as his authentic self, sports culture forced him into silence. The very people who pushed him to answer the "Are you gay?" question were the same ones who made it impossible for him to say yes without fear of repercussions. And yet, despite everything, Thorpe's legacy isn't just about swimming anymore. It's about survival. It's about resilience. It's about the fact that he made it through years of internalized shame, public scrutiny, and overwhelming pressure, and came out the other side stronger than ever. He is now an outspoken advocate for LGBTQ+ rights, fighting to make sure that no young athlete ever has to go through what he did. And for anyone who still wonders why his story matters, look at the next generation of LGBTQ+ athletes who now have someone to look up to. Ian Thorpe didn't just win Olympic gold, he won the right to be himself, and that is a victory worth more than any medal. Number 2. Michael Sam, the NFL star who broke barriers but paid the price. In 2014, Michael Sam made history. He became the first openly gay player to be drafted into the NFL, a moment that should have been celebrated as a turning point in professional sports. But instead of being embraced as a trailblazer, he was scrutinized, criticized, and ultimately pushed out of the league before he ever had a real shot. Let's be real, Michael Sam wasn't just some average college player who lucked into a draft pick. He was an SEC Defensive Player of the Year, a powerhouse at Missouri, and projected to be a 3rd or 4th round pick in the NFL draft. His stats spoke for themselves. His talent was undeniable. Then, just months before the draft, he came out as gay, and suddenly, everything changed. Instead of focusing on his ability, the media fixated on his sexuality. Teams that had been interested in him mysteriously backed off. Analysts started questioning whether he would be a distraction in the locker room. coaches whispered about whether the league was ready for an openly gay player. By the time draft day rolled around, Sam had plummeted down the boards. Instead of going in the early rounds like his talent warranted, he was barely drafted at all, picked 249th overall in the 7th round by the St. Louis Rams. And yet, he still fought. He showed up to training camp, gave it everything he had, and proved that he could hold his own against NFL-level talent. But despite his efforts, he was cut before the season started. No team signed him to their active roster. He briefly joined the Cowboys' practice squad, but that too ended quickly. The message was clear. The NFL wasn't ready for Michael Sam. And let's address the elephant in the room. Plenty of 7th-round draft picks make NFL rosters. Plenty of players with less impressive college careers than Sam get 2nd and 3rd chances. But he didn't. He was given fewer opportunities, less room for growth, and no real shot at proving himself. And yet, some people still claim that coming out helped his career. The irony is disgusting. The truth is, Michael Sam didn't fail the NFL. The NFL failed Michael Sam. It claimed to be ready for an openly gay player, but when it finally had one, the league turned its back on him. But here's what the NFL couldn't take away from him: his impact. Because Michael Sam did what no one else before him had done. He forced the conversation. He made it impossible for the league to ignore LGBTQ+ athletes. And whether the NFL likes it or not, he paved the way for the next generation. So, no, Michael Sam wasn't just the gay football player. He was a fighter, a game changer, and a man who dared to be himself in a league that wasn't ready for him. And because of him, the next Michael Sam won't have to fight alone. Number 3. Greg Louganis, the Olympic legend. They tried to erase. Greg Louganis wasn't just good, he was untouchable. A 4-time Olympic gold medalist, a diving legend, and quite possibly the greatest diver of all time. But despite his dominance in the sport, the world never gave him the respect he deserved. Why? Because Greg Louganis was everything that 1980s America wasn't ready for. He was gay, HIV positive, and completely unstoppable. For years, Louganis lived under suffocating pressure. In the 1980s, being an openly gay athlete wasn't just a risk. It was a career death sentence. Homophobia was everywhere. The HIV/AIDS crisis had fueled fear and misinformation, and being associated with the LGBTQ+ community meant you were instantly labeled dangerous, weak, or a liability. So Louganis stayed silent. He kept his sexuality a secret, not because he wanted to, but because he had no choice. He was already fighting for sponsorships, competing in a world where straight athletes were praised while LGBTQ+ athletes were ignored, or worse, blacklisted. And yet, despite carrying that massive weight, he never missed a dive. At the 1984 and 1988 Olympics, Louganis put on performances that left the world speechless. He didn't just win, he dominated. His dives were flawless, his technique unmatched. Even when the pressure was unbearable, even when the world wasn't ready to celebrate him, he was undeniable. And then came the moment that should have ended his career, but instead defined his legacy. At the 1988 Seoul Olympics, during the preliminary rounds, Louganis miscalculated a reverse 2.5 pike and smashed his head against the diving board. Blood poured into the pool. The world held its breath. A normal athlete would have quit. But Greg Louganis? He climbed back onto the board, landed his next dive perfectly, and went on to win 2 more gold medals. What the world didn't know was that at the time of that accident, Louganis was already living with HIV, a diagnosis he had received just months before the Olympics. He had told no one, terrified of the backlash, the stigma, the possibility that he'd be banned from competing altogether. When he finally came out as gay and HIV positive in 1995, the reaction was brutal. Sponsors dropped him instantly. People treated him like he was a danger to society. The same world that had once cheered his victories now wanted to erase him from history. Number 4. Kai Allams, the first openly transgender NCAA basketball player who refused to be silenced. When Kai Alum stepped onto the court as a Division I basketball player for George Washington University, he wasn't just competing, he was making history. In 2010, he became the first openly transgender NCAA basketball player, and from that moment on, his life was never the same. Before coming out, Alums had already been fighting a battle far bigger than basketball. He knew from a young age that he didn't fit the gender identity assigned to him at birth, but growing up in a society that barely acknowledged trans people, let alone supported them, meant he had to keep his truth buried deep. As an athlete, he was strong, fast, and dedicated. He worked tirelessly to earn his place on the George Washington women's basketball team, but every time he stepped onto the court, something felt wrong. He wasn't just fighting for wins, he was fighting against his own reflection, his own name, his own pronouns. Then, in 2010, he did what no other NCAA basketball player had done before. He came out as a transgender man. And just like that, the world changed. The reaction? Brutal. The media fixated on him not as an athlete, but as a controversy. People questioned whether he should still be allowed to play. Ignorant critics spread misinformation, claiming he had an unfair advantage, even though he hadn't started hormone therapy and was still competing under the same conditions as before. Transphobes flooded his social media with hate. And yet, in the middle of all of this, he kept playing. But the weight of it all, the pressure, the isolation, the relentless scrutiny, became too much. In 2011, injuries and stress forced him to step away from basketball. He had spent years proving himself, only to be pushed out of the sport he loved simply for being himself. Number 5. Fallon Fox, the MMA fighter who took every punch and kept standing. When Fallon Fox came out as the first openly transgender MMA fighter in 2013, the sports world erupted. But instead of celebrating her bravery, the backlash was instant, brutal, and relentless. The media didn't just question her skills, they questioned her right to fight at all. Headlines screamed about unfair advantages. Fellow fighters called her a cheater. And the worst part? Many of the people attacking her had no idea how MMA actually works. So let's get one thing straight. Fallon Fox wasn't some random fighter looking for attention. Before transitioning, she had already been training for years. She underwent hormone replacement therapy, HRT, surgery, and all the required medical treatments before stepping into the cage as a female fighter. Science had already proven that transgender women who undergo HRT lose muscle mass, strength, and endurance. Yet that didn't stop the hate. The critics ignored the facts and turned her into a villain. Fighters like Ronda Rousey and Joe Rogan publicly attacked her without fully understanding the science. And then came the death threats, the harassment, and the endless claims that she was destroying women's MMA. But here's the truth. Fallon Fox didn't dominate the sport. She won fights, yes, but she also lost. She wasn't some unstoppable force like the media tried to paint her as. She was just a fighter, like every other woman in the cage. And despite all the controversy, she kept fighting, because quitting was never an option. Then, in 2014, Fox stepped into the cage against Tamika Brents, a fight that would become infamous. Brents suffered an eye injury and a concussion, and the media went wild. Suddenly, every headline screamed about how Fox broke her opponent's skull. Except that never happened. It was a lie, designed to fuel the outrage. Fighters suffer injuries all the time in MMA, but because it was Fallon Fox, the world acted like she had committed a crime. And that's the double standard. Male fighters break bones, knock out opponents cold, and leave people bleeding on the mat all the time. But when Fallon Fox won fights, suddenly it was a moral issue. The truth? The world of combat sports wasn't mad because she had an advantage. They were mad because a transgender woman dared to compete at all. After years of fighting both inside and outside the cage, Fox retired from MMA. But she didn't disappear. She became a voice for trans athletes, an activist fighting against the very discrimination she faced. So for anyone still asking, should trans athletes be allowed to compete? Fallon Fox already answered that. She fought, she won, she lost, and she proved that trans athletes belong in sports. And if that makes people uncomfortable, good. Because the world only changes when people like Fallon Fox refuse to back down. These athletes didn't just fight for themselves, they fought for every LGBTQ+ athlete who comes next. They faced discrimination, doubt, and outright exclusion, but they never backed down. And because of them, the sports world is forever changed. But here's the question: has professional sports really changed? Are LGBTQ+ athletes finally getting the respect they deserve, or is there still a long way to go? Let us know what you think in the comments. Like this video if you believe in equality in sports. Subscribe to Rainbow Spotlight for more stories of LGBTQ+ game changers. And don't forget to hit that bell so you never miss an update from us.